polls clearly show that I won the debate against Comrade Kamala Harris.
Those polls do not exist. It's Friday, September 13th. I'm Jane Coaston.
And I'm Tre'vell Anderson, and this is What a Day, where once again, we are asking J.D. Vance to be quiet.
He suggested that Republicans shut the government down if they can't manage to pass a new budget, saying, quote, "Why have a government if it's not a functioning government?" I'm sure congressional Republicans loved hearing that.
There are only a few weeks to pass this budget. Did he talk to Trump and get approval for this comment?
But Trump loves government shutdowns. He loves chaos. He's a messy bitch who lives for drama. Now, let's start with some of today's top stories.
Headlines. So because we've done 2 debates and because they were successful, there will be no third debate.
Former President Donald Trump held his first rally since his chaotic, at best, debate performance. Speaking to supporters in Tucson, Arizona, he said he wouldn't debate Vice President Kamala Harris again and offered an account of Tuesday's debate that few people not named Donald Trump would agree with.
But when a prize fighter loses a fight, you've seen a lot of fights, right? The first words out of that fighter's mouth is, "I want a rematch. I want a rematch." And that's what she said, "I want a rematch." Polls clearly show that I won the debate against Comrade Kamala Harris.
Those polls do not exist. Thursday was also a rough one for the former president because the New York Court of Appeals declined to lift a gag order connected to the New York criminal trial against him. The gag order prevents Trump from speaking publicly about prosecutors and court staff involved in the hush money trial, and it will now stay in place until Trump's sentencing in the case, which is now currently scheduled for November 26th. But in Georgia, Trump did get a win. The Superior Court judge overseeing the 2020 election interference case in the state threw out 2 charges against the former president, after determining that they belonged under federal, not state, jurisdiction. Trump still faces 8 charges in that case, but it's currently paused due to challenges from Trump's legal team, which is trying to have Fulton County DA Fani Willis removed as prosecutor. A state judge in North Dakota struck down the state's near-total abortion ban on Thursday, saying it was too vague and calling it a violation of medical freedoms. The law, which was enacted by the legislature last year, only had exceptions for rape, incest, and the mother's life prior to 6 weeks, which is before most women even know they're pregnant. It also made providing an abortion a felony for medical professionals, punishable by up to 5 years in prison and a maximum $10,000 fine. Courts have now overturned 2 abortion bans passed by North Dakota lawmakers. Under the judge's order, abortion would be legal, but the state no longer has a single abortion clinic, since the last remaining provider moved to Minnesota in 2022 after Roe v. Wade was overturned. Republican State Attorney General Drew Wrigley has said he will appeal the decision, because of course he will. The first ballots for the upcoming general election are officially in the mail. That's right. It's happening. On Wednesday, Alabama started sending out ballots to absentee voters. It edged out North Carolina, which was supposed to start sending out mail-in ballots late last week. But officials there had to delay mailing after former independent presidential candidate turned Trump best friend and lackey, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., successfully sued to get his name removed. Meanwhile, a bipartisan group of state election officials warned Wednesday that problems with the U.S. Postal Service could create delays delivering ballots. In a letter to Postmaster General Louis DeJoy, both the National Association of Secretaries of State and the National Association of State Election Directors expressed fears over, quote, inconsistent training and, quote, exceptionally long delivery times, issues that could lead to the disenfranchisement of voters. In a statement, a spokesperson for the USPS said the agency would be, quote, ready to deliver. That's inspiring. New Hampshire's Republican Governor, Chris Sununu, signed a restrictive voter ID bill into law on Thursday. The legislation requires anyone voting in the state to provide a photo ID and also forces anyone registering to vote to show proof of citizenship. The same requirements Trump is pushing for the GOP to be included in the federal budget in order to get it approved. The law will not go into effect until after the upcoming election, but voting rights advocacy groups worry it will confuse voters and election officials. And finally, an update to a story we brought you yesterday. The New York City Police Commissioner, Edward Caban, has resigned. Caban was one of a handful of officials in Mayor Eric Adams' administration who had their phones seized by federal investigators last week, though details about the investigation remain scant. And that's the news.
Alrighty, Jane, we are now in week 2 of the NFL season, and I gotta be honest, it's not necessarily my favorite sport. But you know who has been making it their thing this year? The Democrats.
It's the fourth quarter. We're down a field goal, but we're on offense and we've got the ball. We're driving down the field.
Not only is vice presidential candidate Tim Walz a former coach, but the Harris-Walz ticket is working to get Harris into the game. According to Politico, some of Harris's advisors are recommending she expand beyond traditional outlets with her interviews and appear on some sports shows to meet voters where they are.
That's right. And while Republicans might be trying their best to criticize Tim Walz for being an assistant coach, I will not stand for defensive coordinator slander. So far, those weak attacks have not worked. So, how did the GOP fumble their hold on the sport so badly? And is adopting the language of football a winning strategy for Democrats? For answers to those questions and more, I spoke with Drew McGarry, columnist for Defector and SF Gate. Drew, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
So, we're just over a week into the current NFL season. So far, we've seen Aaron Rodgers make his return to the field, and yet the Jets are still bad.
Yay!
I am wearing a Bengals sweater, despite the fact that the Bengals lost to the Patriots while using a doomed screenplay in 4th and 2 because they hate me.
Sorry.
There was also Tom Brady's broadcasting debut, where he sounded pretty much as awkward as I'd expected. What did you learn about the NFL writ large in week 1?
Okay, so I'm a Vikings fan, so I was very much about my team. But in general, like I'm watching the quarterback play, right? And, I don't think that anything changed at the top, right? It's still the Chiefs and then everybody else. In fact, the Chiefs are probably better than they were a year ago. And so then it's a scramble for second underneath that in the event that the Chiefs, dip in quality of play or Patrick Mahomes gets into some sort of bus accident or something like that. So that's like, anything can happen any given week. That happened with Jordan Love. He nearly, he had a very terrifying knee injury that looked like for all the world that he had torn every CL that he had in his knee, but he didn't. And you never know when that's going to happen week to week. So week 1 is always a good reminder of how tenuous everything is and how stupid your predictions were going into the season.
So the Harris-Walz campaign and other Democrats have been making football a part of their messaging this year in a way I don't think we've seen before. What's happening here, Drew?
There's a couple things. One is that I think it's Democrats realizing, a couple decades too late, as Democrats tend to, that liberals watch football too. I'm as liberal as they come. I'm a diehard NFL fan. When 140 million people watch the Super Bowl, there's a pretty good chance that not all of them are going to vote for Donald Trump, right? It's just not, statistically, that's not going to happen. And what they found in Tim Walz was someone who was a football coach who was, I think, a more accurate reflection of actual current coaches, particularly, if you look in the NFL, guys like Sean McVay, Kevin O'Connell, coaches who are interested in making their players better and aren't just drunk on their own hard-on and, excited to be coaches like in the old Bob Knight style, right? That sort of idea of coaching, I think, is very antiquated and something that conservative Americans are holding on to because they are the type to hold on to the past, right? But I live in a blue state, and I have found in my comings and goings, with youth sports and stuff like that the coaches that I have dealt with are generally sane people. They're not John Gruden. They're normal people. Whether or not they're liberal or conservative, I don't ask them that. I don't have a litmus test for them or anything like that. But they are reasonable. And in a election cycle where one side is really representative of just insanity and not being reasonable at all, it makes perfect sense to get someone who likes football and has coached football and is normal in there to get people to say, oh, yeah, we're like you too. And we're not trying to be like you. We just happen to be. So that's kind of nice.
Yeah, it is. In this case, does football just mean normal? Just like doing normal people stuff?
Yeah, because football's normal shit. Everybody goes and watches games on Sunday and eats too much and all that stuff. That cuts across a lot of divisions.
I think a more interesting question to me is, why did Republicans stop performing a love for football? You know, you see a lot of jokes online about how Democrats got football in the national divorce, but how did it happen?
Well, first of all, I don't know that it's necessarily true, right? Like, they're not like, I think this was true when, Colin Kaepernick was taking a knee and other players were following suit. You had a lot of conservatives being like, sir, please cancel my subscription to the NFL.
Yeah.
That was bullshit.
All the same people who were like super, super mad all the time and said they'd never watch another game and then had a lot of thoughts in the Super Bowl.
Right.
Like, yeah, we can see you.
All total bullshit. So then, when Kaepernick gets blacklisted, they see it as a triumph, but then they're mad. Michael Bennett takes a knee, other players take a knee, whatever. And they don't like, the bullshit end zone thing that's like, it's on us. Like, they don't like the NFL, doing even the most general acknowledgement of racism and police brutality that the NFL can do. Like, they don't want that. And so what I'm seeing from conservatives is not that they dislike football anymore. They just like it as a good vessel to complain about whatever they're complaining about. Because there were insane theories last year when Taylor Swift started dating Travis Kelce that, oh, well, it's conspiracy with Taylor Swift and Joe Biden to rig the election in Joe Biden's favor so that Trump can lose. And it's like, I think it came to its apex in the debate with Harris and Trump, where Trump's brain was so utterly rotted from being in this online goldfish bowl where it's just a bunch of insane dickhead Republicans saying a bunch of just random odd bullshit to each other and convincing themselves that it's true, that you end up with someone who has been president of the United States and wants to be president again, screaming about dogs being eaten into the camera with having no basis in reality whatsoever. So in every sense, I think through this, it's not that, one side owns football or one side, likes football and one side doesn't. It's that football is, aptly speaking, the most useful political football that these people can have, because it's the most popular sport in America. It's the most popular or the most omnipresent cultural force in America. So it makes sense to try to conduct your politics through it without much regard as to like the actual results on the field.
You've been writing about the NFL for years. And
Yes.
as you mentioned, the NFL is America's most popular sport. And I would argue America's real pastime. Like, you look at like most watched broadcasts and it's always like some AFC championship game that got like 40 million viewers or something like that.
Right.
But how has your relationship with the league and the sport changed over time?
I mean, there was a stretch a few years ago, where it was during the Ray Rice thing, and it was during Kaepernick, and I was, I loved the sport, but I was completely disaffected with the league, disaffected with Roger Goodell, the hypocrisy, the greed, the stadium grift, all that stuff. I was disgusted by it all, and, I think there were people in my end who, on the liberal side, did the whole, I'm going to cancel my subscription thing, and they I'm not going to watch it anymore and all of that. And I loved football too much to ever do that. You'd watch it, but you'd have like a bit of a guilty conscience, like, oh, it kills people and, they're greedy and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I got old, and when you're old, you let things go. And it's like, there's nothing I can do about NFL owners and people running the NFL being greedy, insane dicks, right? Same as if you love soccer, you can't do anything about FIFA being as awful as FIFA is. If you like watching the Olympics, and I liked watching the Olympics, you can't do anything about how shitty the IOC is. It's just like, it's the price of doing business if you happen to like a sport and you happen to like watching these athletes and all that stuff. So when I watch it now, I'm just excited for the football part. I understand, the backroom fuckery that goes on, and I cover that, and I point it out as best I can. But it doesn't seep into my enjoyment of the sport anymore. I don't really, I don't watch it with a guilty conscience, I think is the best way to say it. I probably should have a guilty conscience, but it's like, what good is that going to do me? Nothing. It's just like, oh, I watch football, but I feel bad. Well, no one's going to give you a fucking star for feeling bad. Like, it doesn't do any good. if I really wanted to affect change in the NFL, I'd stop watching it and then like go stage a protest outside of league headquarters or something like that. But I'm too old and too lazy, and I like my team too much.
Drew McGarry, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene is, to put it lightly, bonkers. She's a conspiracy theorist who said that the 9/11 attacks on the Pentagon were a hoax and that California wildfires were caused by a space laser controlled by Jewish people. As a side note, it is wild to me that virtually every conspiracy theory eventually ends in anti-Semitism. So when Marjorie Taylor Greene thinks something someone else said is, quote, appalling and extremely racist, well, it's definitely not going to be good, is it, Travell?
I can't imagine it will be.
But I do know this, that her rhetoric and her tone does not match the base, does not match MAGA, does not match most Republicans I know. And I'm completely denouncing it. I'm over it.
What it was a tweet from far-right activist Laura Loomer, in which she said, among other insane things, that if Kamala Harris won, the White House would smell like curry. You know, because Kamala Harris has Indian ancestry.
You were right, Jane. That is not good at all. Oh my God.
Laura Loomer is a self-described white nationalist. I could not possibly tell you all of the weird and racist stuff she said and done. From obsessively hating Muslims, to celebrating the deaths of migrants, to chaining herself to Twitter's offices back in 2018, while wearing a Star of David, comparing being banned from the platform to the Holocaust. Getting banned from Twitter is not, to be clear, like the Holocaust. But she likes to attack other Republicans, too. She accused Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' wife of faking breast cancer, and has picked more than a few fights with South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham. But one very important person thinks she's great, Donald Trump, who brought her on his plane to Tuesday's debate and took her along to a 9/11 remembrance ceremony in New York on Wednesday, despite the fact that Laura Loomer believes 9/11 was an inside job. But Trump?
The great Laura Loomer. Some of you know Laura. She's a fantastic person, great woman.
This is, to be clear, the same person who celebrated, quote, taking over the Republican Party with white nationalist Nick Fuentes, who once said that interracial relationships were the same as a man having sex with a dog. If there has been anything we've learned about Donald Trump, it's that he likes people who like him. And Laura Loomer has based her entire life on loving Donald Trump. She told the Washington Post she lost weight to try and increase her chances of getting a job with him. She even believes that if Donald Trump wins this election, she could get a job in his administration, even as press secretary. And honestly, she's probably right. Which says a little about Laura Loomer and a whole lot about Donald Trump. That's all for today. If you like the show, make sure you subscribe, leave a review, watch the Bengals versus Chiefs game on Sunday, and tell your friends to listen.
And if you're into reading and not just the list of Sunday's Emmy nominees like me, What a Day is also a nightly newsletter. Check it out and subscribe at crooked.com/subscribe. I'm Travell Anderson.
I'm Jane Coaston. Thanks for listening.